So if you were to ask me what's the one thing that you could do right now to make you more persuasive, it would be figure out which thing on this list is your weakest area and work on that first. One of the most important skills you can learn to make an impact is public speaking. History has shown us time and time again that the power to persuade others is what separates the big players from everybody else. From great men like Churchill to populists like Trump. So in this video, I'm breaking down some of the essential elements of persuasive communication. These are fundamentals that will fast track your learning and give you a solid foundation. This list is essentially going to function like a mark sheet that you can use to see where you can improve and what areas you're already strong in. Even if you're a beginner and you think this stuff is too hard to learn or you have no idea what to say, this video could be life-changing for you. Life-changing because these are the tips that made a big difference to me too. I'm Zach, and when I'm not being a doctor, I'm immersing myself in the world of debating. It's a skill that helped develop my confidence, and it's a skill that I think can also solve many of the world's problems if we can learn them. Now, the first element is argument. No, I don't mean the kind of argument where people are getting angry and emotional. Arguments are the logical building blocks of a debate. Now, what separates an argument from just an opinion is that you also give a reason to believe that it's true, and you also say why it matters. You can have the opinion, I think my boss should give me a raise at work, but it's not an argument unless you back that up with, because I've contributed to the company in this and this way and brought in this revenue. And the reason that this matters is because if I don't get the raise, I've got these other job offers which I can go to. Suddenly, that's become an argument, and it's a lot more persuasive as a result. Now, there's lots more to arguments than that. You can also have counter arguments. You can have arguments which are designed to refute what somebody else has said and explain why it's wrong. These are all more complex forms of arguments, but it all comes from the basics. If you understand what your claim is, what your evidence is, and what your relevance is, then it becomes that much more easy to be persuasive when you're speaking. Now, the second element in persuasive communication is evidence. So when you're thinking about evidence, I'll tell you what not to do first. It's not just a matter of picking the first statistic that you come across that supports your point and acting like that's the end of the story. It's likely that you've chosen a weak piece of evidence, and as soon as you get into a debate with somebody who knows more about the topic, you're going to get destroyed. Instead, when you're choosing your own evidence, first thing you should ask is, what kind of evidence is it? It's fine to use anecdotes or stories. They are a type of evidence. It's also fine to use statistics, as long as your statistics are not misleading. Then we get into more scientific types of evidence, where you could have a research study or even a systematic review. And once you know the type of evidence that you're dealing with, you should then ask two questions. Is it flawed in some way? No research study is perfect. If you try to get a sense of what the population's exercise habits are by standing outside Pure Gym and just asking people that come out of the gym, you're going to get a skewed perspective. We should apply those same principles to thinking about scientific studies. Not all of them are very well controlled, and the deeper you go into it, the more you'll understand what the flaws of your particular piece of evidence are. Now, the second question you should ask is it generalizable? Now, this comes up in my work as a doctor all the time. You might be looking at a scientific paper in a particular disease in Spain or South America. That doesn't mean that that study's findings are going to be applicable to your situation. Did they only use men of a certain age? If so, then you can't say anything about men of a different age, or women for that matter. Going a little bit deeper into the evidence about our claims gives us much more stuff we can say in a debate when evidence is brought out. The third element is the rhetorical devices that you use. I think of this like a technique in how you say what you're going to say. So it's nothing to do with the logical content. It's all about how we deliver it persuasively through the choice of words that we use. There are structural devices. Now, these devices help us bring patterns into our sentences and paragraphs that make our points easier to remember, and they also make it easier for our audience to remember. And if your audience don't remember what you're saying, then it's not going to be very persuasive. Some examples are antithesis. So somebody that I see using this all of the time is Justin Welsh, who's a very successful LinkedIn influencer, and his posts where you have a contrasting idea within the sentence, like that's antithesis. Another example is tricolon, where you use 3 ideas in your paragraph, or you could use something like parallelism, where you repeat the same sort of sentence structure again and again throughout your paragraph. But you also have illustrative rhetorical devices to conjure images in your audience's mind. Those images can be emotional, they can be powerful, and they're a great persuasive tactic. And we're not just talking about things like similes and metaphors, although they are useful. We're also talking about the anecdotes that you use, or the storytelling tactics. Storytelling tactics like a cliffhanger, where you build up tension before giving your audience the answer. Techniques like introducing an obstacle, where the audience wonders how you're going to overcome it, and then you can start to answer that question. Tactics like how you describe something in a favourable or an unfavourable way. That kind of characterization is called framing, and it helps get across your message without actually making any logical arguments at all. And you might notice that I was using tricolon there. Do let me know if you want to hear more about rhetorical devices, because I can do a whole other video on that. The 4th element of any persuasive speech is ethos. Now, ethos comes from Aristotle, who basically wrote the foundational text for rhetoric in the Western world. And what ethos means is sort of like credibility and reputation all combined in one thing. It's things like their likability, it's their authority, it's their confidence. Do they seem like a decent, purposeful person? So with likability, it can be through how you carry yourself, but it can also be about humor. So getting humor in early in your speech gives you that likability, especially if it's self-deprecating, and can really boost your ethos. In today's world though, ethos also comes from other factors. So people are much more likely to listen to a YouTuber who's got a large following, or an influencer that makes posts that get hundreds of thousands of likes. That doesn't make what they're saying true, but it plays into our thinking about how authoritative they are on that subject and how likely it is to be that what they're saying is true. Defending your ethos in a debate is extremely important, because one of the ways that people can try to make you irrelevant in the debate is to discredit you through personal attacks or through their arguments. So you should have a real think about how you build your ethos appeal, whether you're relying on qualifications or followership or just being a likable person. The 5th element is pathos, and this again comes from Aristotle. But this was when he was talking about appeals to emotion. Now, one of the problems that I had with this idea is thinking that, well, I should just be able to make a logical argument, and then people will think that what I'm saying is true, because it's obvious that it's true, and I've said all of the logical steps. But in real life, this doesn't work. You can't have a purely logical argument that doesn't appeal to emotion at all, because people just won't find it convincing. And if people don't find you convincing, then they might find someone else convincing that actually does play to people's emotions, and they might be much less ethical than you. Now, some of my tips about appealing to emotions are: you can't appeal to an emotion that isn't already present within the audience. You need to have a really good understanding of your audience and what emotions they have about the issue that you're talking about, and then try to appeal to those. So people might have fears about a certain issue.
This is about numbers, and we have a total open door to 10 former communist countries and to the Eurozone.
But people also have hopes and dreams, and we can have positive appeals to those sorts of emotions too.
I have never been more hopeful than I am tonight that we will get there.
The main thing that you should do when you're appealing to emotions is be sympathetic to your audience. If you judge them for the emotions that they have which are already present, then you're not going to have a good outcome. What you really need to do is understand what your audience want, what their dream outcome is, and then you can start to agitate their pain points that are based around obstacles between them and that dream outcome, or agitate their hope points by really painting a picture of what that brighter future looks like. You obviously need to be ethical about how you use this, but now that you know a little bit about it, you can call other people out when they're using this tactic unethically. The sixth element of persuasion is body language. Now, I think about this as rhetoric of the body. There's several different aspects to this. There's your speech, there's your eye contact, your facial expressions, and your hand gestures. All of these things are extremely important. With your speech, you should think about how you're projecting your voice. I always think about trying to make sure the person at the back of the room can hear me, whether or not I'm using a microphone. You have to slow down your speech. This also gives you time to think while you're speaking. Don't be afraid to put in pauses. When you pause in the middle of a sentence, you're signaling to the audience that what you're about to say next is really important. With eye contact, I do one of two things. I either look over everybody's heads in the audience, and that gives the impression that I'm looking at the entire room, or I pick out individuals in the audience and I look directly at them to give the impression that I'm speaking directly to them. So with facial expressions, smiling is really important, especially if you're trying to bring in humor. You have to look like a human being who is relaxed. If you're talking about something more serious or emotional, you need to be able to convey that with your face. You must be able to show passion. Otherwise, you're going to be a boring speaker. So move those muscles, get in front of the mirror, and make sure that you can actually express emotions on your face instead of feeling like you're reading off a script. Now, hand gestures. Now, generally speaking, I think your hand gestures should be slow and deliberate, because this gives the impression of relaxation and not being nervous. You'll notice that I use my hands a lot, but I try not to do anything that's too repetitive or distracting. The best thing to know if you're making distracting hand gestures is get a friend to watch you and then give you some feedback. The other thing that's important is that when you're making faster hand gestures, you should do it at the same time that you're emphasizing points. Now, if you do all of these things, what it should do is build the impression of charisma. Now, charisma isn't something I believe that you have or don't have. I think it's a skill that can be taught. You can learn to look like you have charisma. Now, the seventh element of a persuasive speech is being able to think on your feet. So the top tips that I have on this are remaining calm and measured and collected at all times. If you appear defensive, you will lose credibility with the audience no matter what. Second, you need to be able to develop the ability to refute an argument on the spot. You need to either be able to say why the claim that your opponent is making is not true, you need to be able to say why their evidence is not good evidence, or you need to be able to say why it's not as relevant as some of the other points that you're making. If you follow one of those three strategies, you will cover 95% of objections to your point. The main thing that you need to be able to do is practice. So get a friend to test you by throwing points at you and seeing how fast you can bat them away. There's a junior doctor strike coming up, and one of the questions that we're probably going to be asked are, aren't doctors massively overpaid? And my defense to that is going to be that claim is not true. Some people are struggling financially to pay their bills and provide for their families, even though they are in work. And actually that there's no guarantee that all of those junior doctors will actually become consultants, because so many of them are leaving the profession. Although if I wanted to say that I didn't think that argument was as relevant, I could also say something like, even if some doctors were well paid, if those doctors aren't incentivized financially to stay, then that's going to hurt patients as the workforce continues to get drained, as happens in lots of African countries. So now that you have these 7 ingredients of what make up a persuasive speech, you need to understand something very important about them. In order to be truly persuasive, you need to have some element of all 7 of these. Relying on one at the expense of the others is not a good strategy. If you have lots of emotional appeal, but you can't think on your feet, then you're going to lose your credibility at the first challenge. So if you were to ask me what's the one thing that you could do right now to make you more persuasive, it would be figure out which thing on this list is your weakest area and work on that first. And if you want to know more about the mistakes people can make in their thinking, then watch this video, which is about cognitive biases and gives you lots and lots of examples. If you want to know more about arguments and how to build those, then I suggest you start with this playlist. I really appreciate the feedback that I'm getting on some of these videos. Let me know in the comments if you have a question and I'll do my best to answer it. See you in the next video.